So whatever function is going on inside the cell is occurring through some kind of signaling. If there is no signaling, the function would stop and the cell would not proliferate properly. So when we talk about cell signaling, two very important aspects of a signaling is someone has to be the sender, that is the sender of the signal, who is producing the signal, and the other one has to be a receiver. So the signal would come from the sender to the receiver. Now what happens is, if this is a cell and say this is the nucleus, then this cell would secrete some molecules, which is called the signaling molecule or the ligand. So this is the signaling molecule or the ligand. So this signaling molecule would eventually go to its proper destination, where it would find something called a receptor. A receptor which is specific for this signaling molecule, and this receptor would be on another cell. So this signaling molecule would bind to this receptor and would eventually transfer a series of signals inside the cell, which would eventually give the cell its actual fate. So we have the secreting cell, we can call this the secreting cell, and we can call this the receiving cell. Now, if we take a deeper dive into various kinds of signaling, there can be three different kinds of signaling. So the first one would be autocrine signaling. So mind it, we are talking about types of signaling. So the first one is autocrine signaling. As the name suggests, autocrine signaling, the cell that is secreting the signaling molecule, let's say this is the signaling molecule, it is secreting this signaling molecule. The same cell would have the specific receptor for this signaling molecule. So this signaling molecule would eventually come and bind to this receptor, which is present on the same cell as secreting the molecule. So this is an automatic process. That is why autocrine signaling. The next one is paracrine signaling. Now in paracrine signaling, you have this cell which is secreting the signaling molecule, and there is another cell which is not so far from this this cell which is secreting the signaling molecule, which is not so far from this secreting cell, and this cell would have a receptor which would act as the receptor for this molecule. It would bind over here and this would transmit some signal inside the cell that would that would dictate its fate. So since it is in close proximity, it is called paracrine signaling. So the first one was autocrine signaling, where the signal molecules are having their receptors at the same cell, that is secreting the signaling molecule. Whereas in paracrine signaling, the cell which is receiving the molecule, which is having the receptor for this signaling molecule, is in close proximity to this cell. And there is another type which is called endocrine signaling. In endocrine signaling, what happens is there's this cell, as usual, which is secreting the molecule, which is secreting the signaling molecule, and the cell which is receiving the signaling molecule is far off from the cell which is secreting the signaling molecule. The cell which is having the receptor for the signaling molecule is far off in the body where the signaling molecules would be received. And this signaling molecule, what it does, it eventually has to move into the bloodstream, So let's say this is the bloodstream. So the signaling molecule has to move into the bloodstream, and this bloodstream would eventually carry this signaling molecule, and then it is going to be received by the cell which is far away from the secreting cell. So this kind of signaling is called endocrine signaling. So in summary, there has to be a cell which is the sender cell, and there has to be a cell which is receiving the signaling. Now the receiving cell would have something called the receptor, which is specific to a signaling molecule. Now the secreting cell would secrete the signaling molecule, which would be eventually taken in, or which would be eventually received by the receptor on the receiving cell. Now, according to the types of signaling, we have the autocrine signaling, where the receptor for the signaling molecule is on the same cell which is secreting the signaling molecule. For paracrine signaling, the receptor or the cell which is receiving the signaling molecule is in close proximity to the cell that is sending out the signaling molecule. And finally, for the endocrine signaling, the cell which is receiving the signaling molecule or is having the receptor for the signaling molecule is far off from the cell which is secreting the molecule. So therefore, this molecule has to get inside the bloodstream, and eventually through the bloodstream it would go to its site of action, or the cell which is having the receptor for the signaling molecule. So that was the basics of cell signaling and what are its types.